Chapter 1. The King Strikes Back. Autumn 1775. King George III has made his decision. The rebellious colonies in America must be punished. For months, the dispute between Britain and its American colonies has been spiraling toward open war. Now, in London, the king and his ministers are preparing to crush the rebellion by force. Not everyone in Britain supports such a course. Some British subjects sympathize with the Americans and believe their grievances deserve to be heard. But increasingly, the rebels are being portrayed in very different terms. To the king and his advisers, they are dangerous and ill-designing men who have forgotten the allegiance they owe to the very power that has protected them. Across government offices, military headquarters, and naval ports, maps of North America are spread across tables, military reports are examined, troop movements are calculated, and preparations begin for a campaign on an enormous scale. Britain intends to raise some 18,000 German auxiliaries to reinforce its forces in America. The king believes that overwhelming military force will bring the colonies back into submission. Once these rebels have felt a sharp enough blow, he tells his ministers they will submit. Across Britain and Ireland, ships are requisitioned. Thousands of soldiers are ordered to assemble. By the time preparations are complete, around 20,000 troops are gathering at Portsmouth, Cork, and other major ports. It will become the largest expeditionary force Britain has ever assembled. Soon, this vast army will sail for North America. But across the Atlantic, the American revolutionaries are preparing for the coming confrontation. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress knows that Britain is about to strike. General George Washington commands the main Patriot Army, which has been besieging the British garrison in Boston. Across much of the 13 colonies, Patriot forces have established a network of local committees, committees of correspondence, committees of inspection, committees of safety. Together, they have begun taking over many of the functions of government and organizing resistance to British authority. But the Patriots do not control all of British North America, far from it. In the West Indies, British colonies remain firmly under the Crown. Their populations depend heavily on the British military to protect them from imperial rivals and, in many cases, the threat of slave revolts. For these communities, rebellion carries enormous risks. They have little reason to gamble everything on the American cause. Further north, Florida is also unlikely to join the rebellion. Its population is relatively small and scattered, and many inhabitants are more concerned about the possibility of a Spanish invasion than about what they regard as British tyranny. Then there are the Native American nations. For the moment, most remain cautiously neutral. They watch the growing conflict and attempt to determine which side offers the greatest advantage. Although many maintain neutrality publicly, a majority quietly regard the British as the more useful ally. For the American Patriots, however, there is still one possibility: Canada. Perhaps the Canadians can be persuaded to join the revolution. The province of Quebec has been under British rule only since 1763. Its European population is overwhelmingly French and Catholic. The Americans assume that these people, having only recently come under British authority, may have little affection for their new rulers. Congress therefore sends appeals across the border. The message is simple: join the rebellion. Help overthrow British rule. But the response is not what Congress hoped for. The appeals are ignored. The French Canadians have little love for Britain, but their situation has changed since the British conquest. The recent Quebec Act has restored important rights and privileges to the French-speaking Catholic population. For many Canadians, the British government is now tolerable enough. The possibility of rebellion is simply too dangerous. And there is another reason for American concern. At this moment, only around 800 British regular soldiers are stationed in Canada. That might seem like an opportunity, but Congress understands what will happen if Britain reinforces them. Canada could become a staging ground for a British invasion of the 13 colonies. The Americans therefore decide that waiting is too dangerous. If Canada is going to become a threat, they must strike first. Congress describes the mission in noble terms. They will liberate the oppressed inhabitants of Canada. The main American advance will come from the north. Around Ticonderoga, a force of roughly 2,000 men is assembled. It is a chaotic and poorly organized force, barely deserving the name of an army. But it has a capable commander, General Richard Montgomery. An Irish-born officer with considerable military talent, Montgomery takes command of the Northern Army and begins moving toward Canada. In September 1775, he lays siege to Fort St. Jean. The fort guards the main route into Canada. The Americans possess a powerful advantage. Earlier in the year, Patriot forces captured the artillery at Fort Ticonderoga. Now those heavy guns are brought north and turned against St. Jean. For 6 weeks, the fort is battered by American artillery. Eventually, its defenders are forced to surrender. The road into Canada is open, but Montgomery's army has already paid a heavy price. Desertion is becoming a serious problem. Disease is spreading through the ranks. By the time the army begins its advance toward Quebec, its strength has already been reduced by roughly half, and Montgomery is not the only American commander moving north. A second force is racing through the wilderness to join him. Its commander is a young and ambitious officer from Connecticut, Colonel Benedict Arnold. Arnold has convinced Washington to give him roughly 2,000 men. Their mission is to reinforce Montgomery before the British can organize an effective defense. But Arnold has chosen an extraordinarily difficult route. His men must cross a vast wilderness of dense forests, rivers, and swamps. The maps have badly underestimated the difficulty of the journey. The terrain is brutal, the weather is worsening, food is becoming scarce, and the soldiers are exhausted. Arnold later admits just how badly he had underestimated the route. Their march, he says, has been accompanied by an astonishing amount of fatigue. He had been deceived by the route. It was far longer than expected and filled with 1,000 difficulties he had never imagined. For many of his men, it becomes too much. One by one, soldiers give up and turn back, but Arnold continues. And in early December, after one of the most punishing marches of the entire campaign, he finally reaches the outskirts of Quebec. There, he joins forces with Montgomery, but their combined army is far smaller than either commander had hoped. Only around 1,200 men remain, and standing before them is Quebec. The city occupies an imposing position high above the St. Lawrence River. Its massive fortifications make it one of the strongest military positions in North America. The walls rise roughly 20 feet. More than 100 cannon are positioned to defend the city. Inside, the British governor, Guy Carleton, has prepared carefully for the coming siege. Carleton is an exceptionally capable commander. He has recruited hundreds of local militia. He has stockpiled ammunition. He has gathered food and other supplies, and he knows that time is on his side. For the Americans, time is their greatest enemy. Winter has arrived. Their men are freezing. Supplies are running short. And many soldiers are approaching the end of their enlistments. In only a few days, hundreds could simply leave the army and return home. Montgomery and Arnold therefore face a terrible choice. Wait and watch their army disappear, or attack now. They choose to attack. In the early hours of December 31st, 1775, with a blizzard raging around the city, American troops begin their assault on Quebec. It is a disaster. The defenders are ready. British and Canadian forces put up organized and determined resistance. American troops advancing through the storm are caught in murderous defensive fire. Richard Montgomery is killed. His men are thrown into confusion and routed. Benedict Arnold is badly wounded. Hundreds of American soldiers are surrounded and captured. The invasion of Canada has failed. The surviving Northern Army is reduced to roughly 600 men. They are isolated hundreds of miles from friendly territory. They are freezing, they are exhausted, and smallpox is tearing through their ranks. Arnold refuses to give up. He stubbornly maintains his position outside Quebec. But the situation is becoming hopeless. Without reinforcements, the remnants of the American army cannot hold out for long. The first major American attempt to invade Canada has ended in catastrophe. Yet, while Arnold struggles in the frozen wilderness, another American officer is carrying out an extraordinary operation hundreds of miles away. His name is Henry Knox, and what he is about to accomplish may prove just as important to the Patriot cause as any battlefield victory. Chapter 2. The Guns of Ticonderoga. Henry Knox is only 25 years old. A bookseller from Boston by trade, he has somehow risen to the rank of colonel in the Patriot Army. Now, General George Washington has entrusted him with an extraordinary mission. Knox must transport the heavy guns captured at Fort Ticonderoga all the way to Boston. The task sounds almost impossible. There are 59 heavy artillery pieces, some weigh more than 2 tons, and they must be moved across roughly 300 miles of snow-covered wilderness, mountains, and frozen rivers. Knox organizes an immense logistical operation. Sleds are prepared, oxen and horses are gathered. Teams of men are assembled to drag the enormous guns through the winter landscape. The journey is slow and exhausting, but Knox knows exactly what is at stake. These are not simply captured weapons. They could provide Washington with the artillery he desperately needs to break the British position in Boston. Washington has been waiting for them, and Knox has promised that he will deliver them. Despite the enormous difficulties, the operation succeeds. On January 27, 1776, Henry Knox arrives. The 59 guns are not far behind. Washington is delighted. The young bookseller has accomplished what seemed almost impossible. Knox is immediately promoted to command the Continental Army's artillery. Now Washington must decide how to use his new weapons. His first instinct is aggressive. He considers using the artillery to support a direct assault on Boston. The plan would send American troops across the frozen Charles River and attack the British position head-on. But Washington's war council persuades him to take a more cautious approach. Instead of attacking the city directly, the Americans will seize Dorchester Heights. The position is strategically important. From the heights, American artillery will be able to threaten the British fleet anchored in Boston Harbor. And without that fleet, the British Army will have a serious problem. The Royal Navy is essential for keeping the garrison supplied. If the fleet can no longer guarantee resupply, the British Army may be forced to abandon Boston altogether. The Americans begin their preparations in secret. At Roxbury, enormous quantities of timber, stone, and hay are quietly gathered. The materials will be needed to construct fortifications on the heights. But the British cannot be allowed to discover what is happening. So the Americans create a distraction. Every night, Patriot artillery opens fire on Boston. The bombardment keeps the British occupied while American workers and soldiers prepare the defenses. The British respond with twice the firepower. Cannon fire echoes across the harbor, but behind the noise, the Americans are carrying out their real operation. On the third night, under cover of darkness and the ongoing bombardment, Patriot troops begin hauling artillery onto Dorchester Heights. 20 guns are moved into position. The work continues throughout the night. By dawn, the transformation is complete. The Americans have entrenched the heights. Around 6,000 Patriot troops now occupy the position. And the British commanders are horrified. The Americans have suddenly established artillery overlooking both Boston and the harbor. The British respond with a massive cannonade. Their guns hammer the new American positions. But the bombardment causes surprisingly little damage. The fortifications hold. The British now prepare an assault. If the Americans cannot be driven from the heights, the British position in Boston may become impossible to maintain. But once again, nature intervenes. Heavy snow begins to fall. Hurricane force winds sweep across the area. The conditions are so severe that General William Howe is forced to cancel the attack. The opportunity is gone, and the British situation continues to deteriorate. Inside Boston, troops are suffering from disease. Food is becoming scarce. The army is close to starvation. Without reliable access to the harbor, Howe knows that his position cannot be sustained indefinitely. He therefore reaches a difficult conclusion. Boston must be evacuated. An agreement is reached. The British will leave the city unopposed, and in return, they will not destroy Boston as they withdraw. On March 20th, 1776, the British blow up their supply base at Castle William. Then the fleet sets sail for Halifax. There, the British Army will regroup and resupply. After more than 10 months, the siege of Boston is finally over. For the first time in the war, the Patriots have forced a major British army to abandon an important city. The victory is celebrated throughout the colonies. News of Washington's success spreads rapidly. Patriot morale soars. Celebrations erupt in town after town. A Connecticut newspaper describes the joy in Boston as the victorious American troops entered the city almost immediately after the departure of the British oppressors. For the Patriots, it is a moment of triumph. But not everyone in America is celebrating. For a significant portion of the population, the British defeat is anything but good news. Chapter 3: A Nation Divided. Not all Americans rejoice at the defeat of the British. Those who oppose the rebellion are increasingly known as Loyalists. They make up roughly 1/5 of the population. But the Loyalists are far from a unified political group. Their motives are diverse, their backgrounds are different, and their reasons for supporting Britain are often deeply personal. Some are recent immigrants who still have strong social and economic connections with Britain. Others are simply devoted to the King and the British Empire. Among them are many Anglicans, for whom George III is not merely a political ruler. He is also the head of the Church of England. Others fear what an independent American republic might become. They worry that once the colonies break away from Britain, the result will not be liberty and prosperity, but anarchy, mob rule, and political violence. They can point to historical examples to support their fears. One loyalist asks a pointed question: which is better, to be ruled by one tyrant 3,000 miles away, or by 3,000 tyrants less than a mile away? For many Americans, however, the issue is not simply political philosophy. They fear the consequences of war itself. The colonies that had once seemed relatively peaceful are now being consumed by violence. One observer laments that their once happy land has been plunged ever deeper into a ruthless war. Blood will flow. Thousands will be reduced to poverty and misery. Many people might prefer simply to stay out of the conflict, but increasingly that is becoming impossible. Across the colonies, Patriot committees of inspection and safety have emerged. Originally created to organize resistance to British authority, these committees have gradually taken on many of the responsibilities of local government. They monitor political activity. They investigate suspected enemies, and they keep a close watch on anyone believed to support the crown. By 1776, anyone suspected of Loyalist sympathies can find themselves under investigation. And sometimes the consequences are much more serious. Patriot mobs may target them. Homes may be attacked. Families may be forced to flee. Some Loyalists are driven from their communities entirely. One clergyman later describes the growing violence. The Patriots, he says, have become increasingly aggressive in harassing and oppressing Loyalists. He was forced to leave his parish, his family, and his friends. He fled into exile to escape violence and imprisonment, and perhaps even immediate death. For some Loyalists, exile is only the beginning. Many leave their homes and form their own militia companies. These Loyalist units will clash with Patriot forces for years to come. The American Revolution is becoming much more than a war between armies. It is becoming a civil conflict. Communities are divided. Families are torn apart. Neighbors turn against neighbors. Fathers find themselves on opposite sides from their sons. The revolution is changing American society from the inside. And in Britain, the king and his ministers are watching these divisions closely. They believe New England is the heart of the rebellion. But they think the situation may be very different in the southern colonies. There, they believe most of the population remains loyal to the crown. If only the Patriots could be defeated, the king's supporters would supposedly rise up. British commanders therefore hope that a show of overwhelming military force will encourage thousands of loyalists to come forward and volunteer. In the Carolinas, royal governors Josiah Martin and William Campbell have been calling for exactly such an intervention. Both men had been forced from their homes by Patriot mobs the previous summer. Now they are waiting for British military support. Finally, in January 1776, the news arrives. Admiral Peter Parker is on his way. He will bring around 50 ships and 3,000 soldiers. For the Loyalists, it appears that the moment has finally come. But the expedition is far smaller than the British mission requires. It is also hastily planned, coordination is poor, and the Loyalists will have to act before the British Army can establish itself securely on the coast. On February 27th, a Loyalist force in North Carolina begins marching toward the coast to join Governor Martin. Many of the men are recent Scottish immigrants. They are determined to fight for the king, but they never reach their destination. At Moore's Creek Bridge, they encounter a larger Patriot force waiting in ambush. The Loyalists attack. Many of the Scottish Highlanders draw their swords and launch what becomes one of the last known Highland charges. But they are met by devastating Patriot gunfire. The charge collapses. More than 1,000 Loyalists are captured in the ensuing rout. The defeat is a major blow to British hopes in the southern colonies. Yet Admiral Parker continues with his own mission. His target is Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston is defended by roughly 6,000 Patriot troops. It is one of the richest cities in North America. It is also a major port. For more than a century, it has served as one of the principal entry points for enslaved Africans brought into British North America. If the British can capture Charleston, they will gain control of an important harbor. More importantly, they hope that victory will encourage thousands of Southern Loyalists to rise up for the crown. But Charleston cannot simply be seized from the sea. Before the British can capture the city, they must first eliminate the Patriot fortifications on Sullivan's Island. The fort commands the entrance to the harbor. Parker's fleet attacks. But the assault quickly turns into a fiasco. The Royal Navy bombards the American fort, yet the fort's unusual construction protects it from the naval guns. Its walls are made largely from spongy palmetto logs. The British cannonballs strike the fort, but fail to inflict the destruction expected. Meanwhile, Patriot shore batteries open fire on the British transports. Royal Navy warships suffer heavy damage. The attack is abandoned. Charleston remains in Patriot hands. The failure of Parker's expedition is devastating for British hopes in the southern colonies. The British have failed to inspire the massive Loyalist uprising they expected, and their military presence in the region is rapidly collapsing. The only other significant British force in the area belongs to Lord Dunmore. His troops are a strange collection of sailors, former soldiers, and an Ethiopian regiment made up largely of formerly enslaved men who have joined the British cause. But Dunmore's forces are suffering terribly. Smallpox and typhus have decimated the ranks. The situation becomes hopeless. Dunmore withdraws his remaining forces. He eventually returns to London. The Loyalists of Virginia are left behind. By July 1776, the British military presence in the southern colonies has effectively disappeared. From the Chesapeake Bay all the way to Charleston, there is not a single British soldier. But the British withdrawal is only temporary. The main British Army is preparing something much larger, and its target will be New York. Chapter 4. The Road to Independence, April 1776. For the first time since its creation, the Continental Army is on the march. The soldiers move through town after town. Crowds cheer them along the roads. Morale is extraordinarily high. The destination is New York City. New York possesses the largest harbor on the eastern seaboard. General Washington expects that sooner or later the British will attempt to seize it. He is right, but while the army marches toward New York, the political revolution is moving even faster. From Georgia to New England, calls for complete separation from Britain are growing louder. Independence, once considered a radical idea, is rapidly becoming mainstream. And one of the most important forces driving that transformation is a small pamphlet. Its title is simple: Common Sense. He does not speak like a politician or an aristocrat. Instead, he attacks the very foundations of monarchy. Why, he asks, should millions of people be ruled by a hereditary king? Why should political power be inherited rather than chosen? And why should Americans continue to submit to a government thousands of miles away? Paine argues that ordinary people are perfectly capable of governing themselves through elected representatives. He presents independence not as a dangerous experiment, but as the natural future of America. One honest man, he argues, is worth more to society than all the crowned ruffians who ever lived. And the cause of America, he insists, is in great measure the cause of all mankind. The birth of a new world is at hand. For patriots, the message is electrifying. For loyalists, it is horrifying. Nicholas Creswell, a loyalist, dismisses Common Sense as one of the vilest publications ever released to the public. He accuses Paine of spreading lies, falsehoods, slander, and treason. To Creswell, the pamphlet's real purpose is obvious. Destroy the existing monarchies, replace them with an independent republic. But Paine's message spreads anyway. Patriot-controlled printing presses produce copy after copy. An estimated 100,000 copies of Common Sense are printed and sold throughout the colonies. Among wealthy merchants and political elites, calls for independence had already been growing for months. Now Paine's simple arguments reach ordinary people. Thousands who had never seriously considered independence begin to see it as the only realistic solution. The political debate has changed. And in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress is preparing to make the most consequential decision in American history. By June 1776, Congress meets almost every day. Debates over independence become increasingly heated. The delegates know that they cannot simply make the decision casually. If the colonies are going to break from Britain, they must stand together. Congress therefore insists that the colonies reach a unanimous decision. Behind closed doors, negotiations intensify. Political bargains are made. Delegates change their positions. Last-minute reversals threaten to derail the entire process. The future of the 13 colonies hangs in the balance. Then, on July 2, 1776, Congress finally votes. The motion for independence passes. The colonies have declared that they are no longer willing to remain under British rule. 2 days later, on July 4th, Congress formally adopts the written Declaration of Independence. The document has been drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, with contributions and revisions from other members of the committee, including John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Its opening words will become some of the most famous in history. The Declaration announces that certain truths are self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they possess inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The document is revolutionary, but it is also deeply connected to Britain's own political tradition. Its language and ideas draw heavily from English constitutional thought, including the Declaration of Right and the English Bill of Rights of 1689. And the document is not written without controversy. Debate and revision continue almost until the final moment. One paragraph criticizing the slave trade is removed. The passage is considered politically dangerous, particularly for the southern colonies. The contradictions of the new republic are already visible. Eventually, 56 delegates sign the declaration. They pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Across the colonies, enormous demonstrations erupt. The 13 colonies now begin referring to themselves as the 13 United States of America. The break with Britain is no longer theoretical. It is real. In Georgia, crowds stage a mock funeral for King George III. In Delaware, his portrait is burned. Royal buildings are defaced in New Hampshire. And in New York City, a massive 15-foot statue of the king is pulled down. The statue is made of lead. The metal is later melted down. It is turned into more than 42,000 bullets for the American war effort. The message is unmistakable. The colonies are now independent states, but independence exists only on paper unless the Patriots can defend it. Britain still possesses an enormous army, and that army is coming. The war is about to enter a completely new phase. Chapter 5, The British Return. For more than a year, the rebels in America have operated with remarkable freedom. They have driven British forces from Boston. They have established their own institutions of government. And now they have declared themselves independent. But Britain has not accepted any of it. The moment of reckoning is approaching. On May 6, 1776, General John Burgoyne arrives in Quebec City from Britain. He brings with him 7,000 reinforcements. For the Americans still fighting in Canada, the timing could hardly be worse. Brigadier General Benedict Arnold has managed to maintain an American blockade around Quebec for 5 months, but Arnold's position is becoming impossible. The arrival of Burgoyne's massive reinforcement force changes the balance of power completely. Arnold is now hopelessly outnumbered. He has no choice. He must retreat. The American forces begin withdrawing from Canada. The campaign that had begun with hopes of bringing Quebec into the Revolution is now turning into a desperate escape. In June, General John Sullivan takes command of the American forces. He attempts to reverse the retreat. Sullivan orders a counterattack at Trois-Rivières, but the attack ends in disaster. The Americans are unable to stop the British advance. Their retreat continues, and soon Montreal falls to the British. The American invasion of Canada is effectively over, but the British victory in Canada is only the beginning. While the fighting in the North is collapsing, George Washington is preparing for what he knows will be the main British offensive. New York City. Chapter 6, The Gathering Storm. Washington moves the bulk of the Continental Army toward New York. The city's harbor is the largest on the eastern seaboard. Its location makes it strategically vital. Whoever controls New York will possess an enormous advantage in the struggle for control of the colonies. For weeks, Washington waits anxiously. He knows the British are coming, but he does not know exactly when. Every day, he watches the horizon. Then, on June 29th, ships are spotted in the distance. At first, there are only a few, then more appear. 30 ships, 70, more than 100. Hour after hour, the fleet continues to grow. The sight sends New York into panic. The city erupts in confusion. Alarm guns begin firing. Troops rush toward their assigned positions. Washington himself later describes the atmosphere. The distress and anxiety, he writes, are almost impossible to imagine. The entire city is in an uproar. The alarm guns are firing. Soldiers are hurrying to their posts. And Washington can only pray that he will never experience such feelings again. The British have arrived. General William Howe commands the expedition. With him are 120 ships and approximately 10,000 soldiers. These troops have spent the previous 3 months training and preparing in Halifax. They are determined to avenge the British defeat at Boston. But Howe's army is only the beginning. Soon, he will be joined by Admiral Peter Parker's Southern Expedition, and an enormous fleet is sailing from England under the command of Howe's brother, Admiral Richard Howe. The scale of the British operation is staggering. Altogether, approximately 32,000 soldiers, 12,000 sailors, and 400 ships are converging on New York. It is almost half the military might of the entire British Empire. The Americans are about to face the largest concentration of British power ever assembled against them, and there is no turning back. British troops begin landing on Staten Island. The landing is completely unopposed. For the small loyalist population there, the arrival of the British is a moment of celebration. They cheer as the redcoats come ashore. For the Patriots, however, the situation is terrifying. The British Army is now firmly established outside New York. And then, 10 days later, the British receive news that changes the nature of the conflict. The Declaration of Independence has been adopted. The colonies have officially declared themselves independent. General Howe now has his answer. Britain will not recognize American independence. It will fight to destroy it. The British response comes quickly. Two Royal Navy frigates sail up the Hudson River. Their guns open fire on Manhattan. The ships bombard the American position with almost complete freedom. The message is unmistakable. The British are back. The victories at Boston are forgotten. The invasion of Canada has failed. The southern colonies have not risen for the king. And now the largest British force ever sent to North America is assembling around New York. The Americans have declared independence. But declaring independence is one thing. Defending it against the might of the British Empire is another. The great test is about to begin.